Hey, welcome back to the Brisket Brothers Barbecue. We are here with our long-awaited brisket video. We got to throw a shout out to our friend Avi Shemtov out there in Sharon, Massachusetts. Briskets, at least the full packer briskets, are kind of hard to find out here, so greatly appreciate him helping us out. As you can see here, we have a pretty simple 12.7 pound packer brisket. We're going to take you through a little bit of the trim. You always want to make sure that you get rid of your packaging and your purge. Make sure you're not rinsing off your brisket in the sink, as you can contaminate things and get pretty sick. So try to keep all that contained, get it pat dry, and we'll be back in a moment for the trim. All right, well, we're about done patting our brisket dry. We have everything wiped up on our cutting board, and so we're about to get ready with our trim. Very quickly, as everybody knows, what makes a packer brisket is it includes two distinct muscles. You have the one on the left here, which is the flat, duly named as it's mostly flat. And then you have the one towards the end there on the right, which is that lump of fat. There's also a point muscle under there that actually runs underneath the middle of the brisket there, over the top to overlap with that flat. What you're going to see here is we're going to identify that there's definitely some hard fat on the top of this brisket that you're going to want to try to trim off as much as possible. We're also going to want to get a lot of that shiny silver skin that you see there far on the left on top of the flat, as you want to be able to give the rub a chance to adhere to as much of the meat surface as possible. On the outside over here, you're going to see a little bit of a discoloration running around the entire length of the brisket. A lot of people believe that could be some rot or some spoilage, or things that could indicate that the brisket isn't of high quality. That isn't the case at all. That outside is really just some scalded surface meat from the high temperature water they use at the plant when they rinse down these things. So all you got to do is carve that off, and you'll be just fine looking underneath. As you go through the rest of your carving and your trimming process, we'll kind of speed it up here so we can go a little faster. But the goal is really to make your brisket as aerodynamic as possible. You want all of that hot air and smoke to flow over the entire piece of meat nice and evenly. So wherever you can, get around the outside. If you see parts that are too thin, don't have a lot of meat, just go ahead and take those off, as they're just going to crisp up and fall off towards the end anyway. You don't have to go crazy. You can do as much trimming or as little trimming as you like. But for the purposes of this video, we'll take you through the fast-forwarded full entirety of our trim process. All right, looking pretty good on top over here. Just do a quick check to run our hand around, make sure we don't feel anything that feels out of place or too hard. You can see here more of that point muscle we talked about is exposed. You have that layer of fat in between the point muscle and the flat muscle. See if you can get a better look on it when you flip it over. But you can see that the grain runs differently on the flat versus the point. The point is definitely a much fattier piece. In fact, in Texas, I think they refer to the flat as the lean, and they refer to the point as the fatty. Not in Massachusetts, though. It's the point and the flat. So we're just going to take another look around the outside here. One of the things that we're going to do with our brisket today is we're actually going to take that point muscle and we're going to turn it into some burnt ends, a Kansas City delicacy from the barbecue world. So as you can see here, we're pointing out where that line breaks between the flat and the point with the overlap. What we're going to do is we're going to expose that point meat on the back side as well by taking off this fat cap. Now, typically a rule of thumb for any brisket cook is you want to leave about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch of that fat cap on this back side of the brisket, as a barrier to help protect the meat. Um, in this case, though, we're going to be taking that off of the point as one, that point has a lot of intramuscular fat already, so it doesn't really need to be protected so much. And two, for our burnt ends, we really want that meat to have as much bark as possible. And to get the bark, you need the exposure of the meat for it to adhere to. So we're going to run this back, we're going to fast forward through, and we're going to show you just about how much of this point we're going to expose. All right, we're back. We have our brisket trimmed. We have that point muscle nice and exposed here on the back side with a nice layer of that fat cap still left to protect our flat. For our binder today, we're going to be using this Miner's beef base. I know a lot of people use different things such as mustard or Worcestershire sauce or things of that nature. You really can use whatever you want. But we found, after watching a couple of other videos from pitmasters online, especially from Harry Sue, that utilizing something like this enhances the beefiness of the meat. And it's worked really well for us. So it's kind of a pain to spread around as it starts off pretty stiff, but tends to warm up and gets looser as you go. But all you really need is a tablespoon and a half per side, and just really get a good coating across all of the meat. Once you're nice and coated here, we'll talk about what we're going to be doing for our rub today. Pretty basic in nature. We'll be doing our kosher salt. We'll be doing some coarse ground black pepper. We'll be using some garlic powder and then a little bit of chili powder. Once that's blended together, you just get that in a shaker. Always good to have it in a shaker combined so that you can evenly distribute it across the meat as opposed to kind of just dropping it wherever it lies. So we're just going to do a light coating as we go around the outside here, starting with our sides first and getting the surface on top done. We are going to be seasoning on top of that fat cap. I know some people say that it's not worth it, but we believe it is. Get yourself flipped over here. Go ahead and apply your binder once more to the other side, and then get that same thin layer of rub put on. Now we're going to be putting on that thin layer now, the night before, so that we can give the meat some time to sweat with the salt on that rub. What that's going to help with is once we get it onto the smoker tomorrow, it'll assist with creating that nice structured and firm bark that we're looking to achieve. Once you have everything nice and coated, we'll do a quick look at what it looks like from the outside. All sides are nicely dusted. We have our binder working well. We have everything looking good. We're going to get this thing wrapped up, and then we'll see you back tomorrow morning. All right, we're back. It is the next morning. We have our smoker ready to go. We have our brisket pulled out of the fridge. We tend to pull whatever protein we're throwing on out of the fridge right before we're ready to put it on the smoker. From our understanding, cold, wet meat tends to absorb smoke better than anything else. So right out of the smoker, we take a look at what we're looking at with our brisket. As you can see, a lot of moisture on the bottom of the pan from that night of sweating with the rub on it. We're going to throw a light layer of rub on the top of it, pat it in once more just to keep it nice and even. And then we're going to go ahead and get this right onto the smoker. Once we have our rub on, we're going to go ahead and take our roughly 12-pound brisket with one hand, with the other in the camera, and walk it over to the smoker. As you can see there, we do have one wood chunk on the top grate of our smoker. That is intended to lay the brisket over so that we don't get any pooling on the flat muscle side, because if we have moisture pooling, it's going to make it difficult for that bark to form. So we throw either one or two pieces of wood chunks right underneath there just so everything can run off nice and evenly. All right, we got our brisket on. We have our smoke rolling. We have a backup piece of meat there on our second rack, and we'll see you for our first check-in. All right, welcome back. We're here for our first check-in on our brisket. We're about 2 hours in at this point. Just want to take a look and see how we're looking so far. Everything's looking good from this perspective. We're going to take our spritz that we made up of 2 parts cold water, 2 parts beef stock, and 1 part of hot sauce. We're just going to give it a quick once over, go around the outside, just make sure, like we had said before, we're keeping everything cold and wet to absorb as much of that smoke as possible. When you're done with your spritz, after you throw your lid back on, just make sure you leave that in the fridge. All right, we're here for our 4-hour check-in. Just going to take a look and see how we're doing as far as the formation of our crust. Everything's looking good so far. A little bit of pooling there in the middle. You can just let that run off by lifting up the brisket. But you're going to hit it again with your spritz and throw that lid back on. We'll do a couple more check-ins, a couple of scratch tests to see how that bark is forming, and we'll be back when we're ready to wrap. All right, we're back here. We're 8 hours in. We're doing our scratch test. We're not seeing anything of significance come off, so thumbs up. We're ready to wrap. We're going to be wrapping with some pink butcher paper today. Make sure that the length of butcher paper that you're going to be using is about 3 to 3.5 times the length of your brisket to make sure that we give it enough room. One thing that we're going to do before we get this wrapped on is we're going to slowly drizzle some beef stock onto the top of our brisket. And one of the key indicators that tells you that you pulled your brisket to wrap at the right time is that when you drizzle this on top, you're not seeing chunks of your bark start to run off with the liquid. So it should absorb most of that liquid. You'll see a little bit run into the paper there, but this is a great way to ensure that your brisket is staying moist throughout the wrapping process. Great look there at my 5-year-old's finger. He has since been fired as lead cameraman. So, all right, we got some beef stock onto our brisket, and we're ready to wrap this thing up. You're going to do a couple of rolls through. Make sure you get as many of those sides tucked in as possible to keep that wrap tight. Once you get it all done, you get it back onto your smoker. You can maintain that same 260, 265 temp, or you can jack it up to 285. Shouldn't be an issue, whatever your preference is. We threw a probe in, definitely not necessary. We'll be working off a touch to tell when it's done. The old saying goes, it's done when it's done. After 6.5 hours in wrap, we believe that our brisket is ready for its final look. We're going to peel back this butcher paper. You can see all of that moisture accumulating at the bottom there. Color is looking good. I know under this light it might look a little green. Definitely not the case. But we're not focused so much on the temp here. We're going to go ahead and do a probe test to see how that tenderness looks. And as you can see, when you're going through here, you don't want any resistance or pullback as you're coming back out. This is feeling pretty good across the board. We're going to go ahead and get this on the cutting board and get ready to rest. All right, so before we get our flat into a wrap and into the cooler to rest, we want to go ahead and separate the point muscle from the flat muscle. And so the way that we're going to do that is we're going to flip the brisket up here onto its side, slightly out of camera view because why not? And we're just going to run that knife across that fat layer in between the two muscles. And there's a little bit of a guessing game, especially if you manage to get a nice consistent bark around the outside, but you can feel with your knife. If you run into some pretty good resistance, you know that you're making it a little bit into the meat. So just do the best you can to get the two muscles separated. You can continue to run slowly across. You see here we get through, and when we peel this back, you're going to see just a little bit of meat towards the bottom portion of there because we're not professionals here. But as you can see, that's what you want to look at here. This is the separation of the two muscles sub that little bit of flat muscle that ended up on the bottom portion of that point. Once you have these separated, you're going to take your flat, you're going to wrap it up in whatever you have. If you have a aluminum pan you want to cover with foil and some towels, you can do that. For our purposes here, we took some heavy-duty aluminum foil and just wrapped it up, wrapped it in the towels there on the right, and then threw that in a cooler while we went ahead and we prepped our burnt ends. So here we have the end product of our burnt ends. I'm sure everybody would have loved to have seen how we got to this end product. However, thanks to the miracles of late night camera work, that was not in the cards for this video. So we're going to throw up in the text overlay some of the instructions on what you do. It's fairly simple, but what you get as an end product is probably one of the best bites in barbecue. To have all of that intramuscular fat rendered down within the point, and then to have this complete 360 coating of rub and sauce that's now been tacked up from being back on the smoker or the oven for an extra hour, all packed into one morsel is unbelievable. I know my family in particular isn't a fan of the fatty slices. If you were to do the full brisket and then sliced whole, but this way everybody really enjoys these portions, and it gives us the best way to utilize the full packer brisket. All right, we'll take you through a little bit of the end of our burnt end review here. As you can see, some great coating and tacking along the outside, the layers of flavors here between the initial rub and the bark, and then the secondary rub with the sauce, along with that tender meat in the middle, just falls apart there. All that fat in the middle rendered out. Really just an incredible bite of barbecue. As we take a look forward here, we take a look at our flat muscle coming out after rest. We got a slice out of the middle here. Another casualty of late night video production was a lack of that video clip. But we had a great smoke ring, terrific flavor, good moisture throughout, and that bark really held up well. It was fantastic. A lot of spice, a lot of pepper, exactly what you're looking for. As you know, we're not the sole evaluators of the performance of our brisket, so we have our brisket brothers chiming in. Brisket brother gives us 2 thumbs up. Apparently the more critical of the two, our middle brisket brother, kind of waffled for a bit here, but eventually he thought better of himself and landed on a positive review. But boy, he has a flair for the dramatics, huh? There we go. Thanks, buddy. And finally, the little brisket brother. He's just a character in himself. He's really got to feel the food as he's eating it. And he comes out with 2 thumbs up, or whatever that is on the right. Brisket dogs also get their opinion. We'll start with Zoe. Zoe, what are you thinking? Can't really tell, but I'll look at that tail and say we're looking pretty good here. And last but not least, we have Artie. If Artie takes your finger off, it's good. Yep, there goes my finger. We'll take that as a victory. Thanks, Arts. All right, that does it for our brisket video. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, enjoy the ending montage.
Smoke is rolling.